So Fabian, I will let you introduce yourself first so that then we'll flow into our speakers.
Fantastic, and thank you so much, Angela. And I'm just super excited about this opportunity today to talk about sustainability in animal agriculture, and launching this council is just a dream of mine and a dream of Angela's. That we have worked hard on this, and we're very grateful for NIA to allow us and to go with us in this path to discussing sustainability across the industry and across all protein sectors, animal protein sectors. And I am just stoked. I'm very excited about this. Today is going to be a very, very interesting day. The conversation is going to be full of great information and data and many things that we'll discover. So really, really excited. This is going to be one of many. Again, my name is Fabian Bernal. I am the Global Head of Sustainability for DeLaval, as well as the co-chair of the Sustainability Council.
Thank you, Fabian. I'm Angela Baysinger. I am a veterinarian. I work for Merck Animal Health, and I have responsibility within Merck for animal welfare for North America, but also that drags in a lot of times sustainability within the producer level of what we do. So I think I have the pleasure of being able to work with Fabian to co-chair this council, and I'm really excited about the council's opportunity to bring people from across the entire food chain together to not only look at where we are with sustainability, but where we can go and learn from our mistakes, learn from our successes, and collaborate, have everyone collaborate to try to accomplish what we can with moving sustainability forward. And with that, I will, if we can go to the next slide, please. I want to start out with our first speaker for the day. And the title for the first speaker is The Global Story. And I will introduce to you for this topic, Jack Britt, and we will let Jack give a little bit of his background, but as you can see here on the slide, he is a consultant, but he has a lot of background from academia as well as research. So with that, I want to give Jack the floor because I know Jack has an immense amount of information that he wants to give to us all today. Jack, the floor is yours.
Angela, thank you. And it's an honor to be part of the Sustainability Council. I have been working really for the last 6 or 8 years on the agriculture and dairy industry in the world over the next 50 years. So my team has had a lot of opportunity to talk about sustainability and many other topics. As the cow on the right says, we really need to have the perspective of our customers to understand what they want, what they need, because that is always changing in all of our areas. And so, for example, with milk, we were talking about A2 milk or lactose-free, or making it affordable and shelf life. But many of our customers in the future will be outside of the US or outside of North America. So we need to also think about that. Let's go to the next slide. This takes a look at the future, the next 50 or so years. On the left, the populations of the various regions of the world are shown. As you can see, 82% of the people in the world 50 years from now or so will be in Asia and Africa. We'll actually see a decrease in population in Europe. If you look at the slide on the right, North America is going to increase about 23%. Europe's going to decline about 11%. That's quite a significant number of people. Africa will increase in population by 147%. That's over 1.5 billion people that we have mouths to feed in the future. So that is something for all of us to be thinking about. Let's go to the next slide. We often think that we have all of the food animals, but I put together a list of all the food animals in the world in 2019. This comes from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. You see, we have about 32 billion food animals in the world. We see some animals on the list that we would not normally consider food animals, but in other countries, they are used as food. But one of the things that's interesting, as we look at the regions of the world, it's very clear that East Asia, China, and that area, Indonesia, and so on, dominate in terms of where the food animals are located. Central South America ranked fairly high. North America only has 5. If we look at first, second, and third places of the food animals in the world, only 5 of those are from the USA. None from Canada, by the way. One of the things that's important here, while we have a lot of animals in those other countries, their productivity may be very low. And so that's where sustainability becomes very important. Let's go to the next slide. This shows where the US ranks in terms of various animal proteins. The middle column is the global tons of protein produced by those various lines, the products, cow and buffalo milk or hen eggs or turkey meat or whatever it might be. And you can see the US ranks second in cow and buffalo milk. It ranks second in hen eggs, first in chicken meat, first in cattle meat, first in turkey meat. So we do really well. We rank 5th in fish and seafood. We have to consider that as a meat as well. We're low in 2 or 3 areas, and maybe that's an opportunity for us as we think about the countries that have growing populations. Perhaps we can provide some products that they already consume. Next slide. One of the ways that we have looked at productivity around the world is what we call the intensity of production. And intensity is simply a calculation that takes a country's portion of the world production, in this case of cattle meat, and divide that by the world's proportion of cattle that are in that country. And if it's above 1, that means that you're producing significantly above the world average. And if it's below 1, that means that your production is not very efficient. Those that have a high level of productivity would be much more sustainable than those that have a low level of productivity. So we can do this with milk or meat or any of our products. And we really want to have a high production intensity. These countries on the left are those that have at least 1% of the world's meat animals. Those on the right that you see that are all above 1 have less than 1% of the world's meat animals, but produce more than 1% of the world's meat. And so productive countries are more sustainable. And you would recognize many of those as being highly sustainable. Let's go to the next slide. Another way is of measuring productivity, and we played around with different ways. We asked the question, how many dairy cows does it take to produce 100 liters of milk per day? 100 liters of milk per day. That's about 200 pints a day, a little more than 200 pints. In the United States today, it takes 3.5 cows to produce 100 liters per day. 3.5 cows. If you go to the very right to Tanzania, it takes 176 cows to produce 100 liters of milk per day. So really high levels of productivity are what lead to high levels of sustainability. And if you look at those red columns all the way over to the right, those are simply not sustainable production levels. I stuck Nigeria in there in blue simply because, not because it has a high level, but Nigeria's population will pass the population of the United States within the next 10 or 12 years. And so we have countries that are fairly small that have huge populations that are doing poorly in terms of their productivity of feeding their people. Let's go to the next slide. One of the things that I like to do is to see how do we perform compared to other countries. And I ask my neighbors and friends, where do you think the US ranks in terms of using fertilizer and pesticide? And they say, oh gosh, we've got to be number 1 or 2 in the world. Well, actually, we're far below the world average. This shows where the United States ranks in terms of tons of N, P, and K total per hectare of land compared to other countries in the world. Look how low we are. And we won't spend a lot of time looking at the countries across the bottom, but many of those so-called green European countries are over on the left-hand side. If we look at the Netherlands, for example, it's about number 5. China's number 2, Egypt's number 1. So we do extraordinarily well in using resources, and that's why we have good sustainability in our programs. If we look at pesticides, I don't have pesticides on this slide, but if we look at pesticides, we actually rank slightly better in pesticides than we do in fertilizer, even lower than rank here. So we have a good story to tell in terms of producing food. Next slide. One of the things that's been measured by FAO, and they continue to measure this around the world almost every year, that's the Food and Agricultural Organizations, the United Nations. They measure greenhouse gas production. And this is from one of their recent studies. North America has the lowest greenhouse gas production of any section of the world. Western and Eastern Europe are close to us. Russia actually does a pretty good job in terms of producing meat or milk with the lower greenhouse gas production. Everyone else is higher. Oceania, Australia, New Zealand do pretty well. But look at sub-Saharan Africa. It's producing almost 7 times as much greenhouse gas per kilogram of milk as the United States is. And so we have regions of the world with huge populations that have terribly poor sustainability numbers. Next slide. This shows a similar ranking also by FAO. This is pork, meat, greenhouse gas production per unit of carcass weight. North America is the lowest in the world. Russia's pretty close. Over on the left is Latin America, Latin and Central America. They're very high. Western Europe is higher than I expected. Around the world, if we look at total world, United States is significantly lower, about 25 or 30% lower than the world average. So we have a really good message. And if we look at broilers and layers, I didn't want to put too many charts on that, but if we look at broilers and layers, we're either the lowest or near the lowest in greenhouse gas production globally. So we are really down the road quite successful in sustainable production of animal protein. Let's go to the next slide. One of the questions that is seldom asked but needs to be asked every day, what diets feed the most people? Christian Peters at Tufts University published a paper a few years ago looking at not just protein and carbohydrates, but actually essential nutrients. So he looked at all essential nutrients that we need, and the farmland on which those nutrients were produced had to be produced according to the recommendations of NRCS for the entire United States of America. And we could feed the most people with a dairy plus vegan diet, simply because dairy and meat and eggs have those 9 essential amino acids that are missing in many plant foods. we talk about protein, but we really need to be emphasizing essential nutrients that our bodies don't make and we have to have. So number one is dairy vegan. Number two is eggs plus vegan. Number three, it's a 20% omnivore meat-based diet. Vegan ranks fourth. We can feed 85 million 85 million more people in the United States with a dairy and vegan diet than we can a vegan diet alone, just because we get the essential amino acids from the dairy and the eggs and the meat that we don't get from vegan diet. If you eat a vegan diet alone in the United States, you can get all the essential nutrients, but in doing that, we generate about 2,000 calories per person per day, extra energy that we don't need. So what do we do with that 2,000 calories of oil and starches that we don't need to consume? Let's go to the next slide. One of the things that we talk about is we need to eat more, we need to eat more, we need to eat more. But in fact, we may not need to eat more sometimes. This shows the meat, poultry, and eggs intake of men and women in the United States at various ages. And the women are on the right. And you can see that the women are always consuming right what the dietitians and the nutritionists recommend in terms of meat, poultry, and eggs per day. If you look on the left, from about 4 years of age, 14 years of age up to about 70 years of age, men consume more meat, poultry, and eggs than are really recommended. I think we have to understand that there is a limit on how much people should be eating in order to have a regular, normal, balanced diet. So this is what meat, poultry, and eggs looks like. Let's go to the next one. We'll look at dairy. In dairy, and that includes milk, and it includes cheese, it includes butter, it includes ice cream, it includes yogurt, all dairy. We are under consuming dairy, both for men on the left and women on the right, at nearly all ages, except in the 1 to 3 year olds. Maybe if we took good care of our older folks, our children and adults, older children and adults, as we do our babies with dairy products, we would raise those numbers. Because dairy has some nutrients and essential nutrients, micronutrients especially, that we really don't get very well from other foods. And that's an important message for us. While we're really talking about protein, I think we really need to put a greater emphasis on what are the essential nutrients that you need, because you can produce a lot of extra protein that you might not end up consuming. And so we need to pay attention to that. Let's go to the next slide. I guess that next slide is for Lara. So thank you for the opportunity.
Can we, I guess now, I haven't seen a lot of questions pop up yet in the chat. So this is going to be my opportunity to just remind everybody that if you can put any questions you have as they pop up in the chat, that would be amazing, so that we can catch what you're thinking as you think it. And then what I'll do now is we'll save those questions till the end, so you can continue to put them in the chat as fast as you want to, because now I want to introduce Dr. Lara Moody, and she serves as the Executive Director at the Institute for Feed Education and Research. She also works closely, as you can see, with the IFEEDER's Board of Trustees. She is former Vice President of Stewardship and Sustainability at the Fertilizer Institute. And at this time, I will turn it over to Lara. So Lara, the floor is yours. And you're still muted, Lara. Sorry.
I appreciate the honorary awarding of a PhD, but I'll have to decline it at this time. Many universities tried to get me. When you have a female engineer that is working in the university system. Many folks try and get you to do a PhD with them, but I declined and moved on. So anyways, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and give you some insights into what the feed industry is doing. I'm going to take a different path in the sustainability discussion than Jack did. And I want to think more about sustainability as the journey that we're all continuously on, no matter where we are in that effort. You know, when you look at animal feed, for example, monogastric animals, so pork, poultry, when we consider their diets and the carbon footprint of the animal as a whole, up to 65% of the animal protein production can be, the carbon footprint can be tied back to feed. And so feed really is an element that is gaining some focus, especially as additional emphasis is being put on scope 3 emissions by our downstream consumers and companies. And so I just want to dive in a little bit about what IFEEDER and what the feed industry is doing in the sustainability space, but also why it's such a challenging space to work. So if you would give me the next slide. So IFEEDER is the research and education foundation for the American Feed Industry Association. And our mission is to advance understanding and trust in a sustainable feed and pet food supply chain through timely research and education. And as you can see by our mission statement, while we do other work outside of the sustainability space, sustainability is a major focus for us. Next slide. As we look at our efforts in the sustainability space, we tend to think about it as putting all of the pieces of the puzzle together. And I want to just give you some insight into what the feed industry is doing in this space. First, relative to stakeholder engagement. We have as stakeholders that we have to listen to in the feed space, those that are upstream and those that are downstream of us. Upstream from the folks like the corn growers or the other crop commodity growers or other suppliers of inputs that are providing the material, the base material that we're then turning into feed, to the downstream folks from us who would be the animal feed or the animal producers. So the folks who are growing and processing animal protein for moving on then to the consumer goods companies who are making the products that are going to the public. And so it can be really challenging for the feed industry to figure out what the needs of our upstream and downstream folks are. So listening to stakeholders is a big element of what we do. And as we'll talk a little bit about here today, recognizing that all animal agriculture uses feed, and we can't just adhere to kind of one element or the other, one animal sector or the other. As we look at the needs in the feed space, one of the elements that is growing in interest right now is what's referred to as LCAs, or life cycle assessments. And so in particular, as we're trying to understand the energy use or the water use or the carbon use or the greenhouse gas emissions for each of the different things that are produced and utilized in the food supply chain, feed is no different than that. And there is a growing interest in the use of LCAs or the understanding of LCAs for the elements that are used in feed production. The reason for that is because, again, when we start thinking about the downstream needs, the sustainability efforts that are underway, it's easy to think about it, I think, in the greenhouse gas space, because our map to that is through scope 3 emissions, where a consumer product goods company is looking to gain information on all of the elements that are coming in for its supply chain to produce a particular product. And so in the life cycle assessment for greenhouse gas emissions, we might be looking at all of the elements that add up, for that life cycle assessment to determine the carbon footprint of any particular feed product. So there's a lot of work that's being done in that space right now. The American Feed Industry Association and IFEEDER, working with them, are utilizing or working on what we call the GFLI database, which stands for Global Feed Lifecycle Assessment Institute. And essentially GLFI is developing a database and tool which aims to be the reference for assessing and benchmarking feed industry's impact and improvement of LCA calculation. So as an example, if you are a dairy nutritionist and you want to change a ration or optimize a ration for its sustainability elements, you might be able to look at that ration and go process those different ingredients in that ration through the GFLI database tool and begin to understand what the footprint is for various characteristics of that ration. So we aren't there yet, but that's the goal that we're working towards. So that's clearly an element that's important to us as we think about the transparency needs of data. We also engage with the consumer in many ways. Sometimes, as many of you know, engaging with consumer can be quite cost prohibitive. So for us, we aren't looking to engage the consumer directly through our work, but to leverage others that are working in that space. And two ways we do that within IFEEDER to help us tell the sustainability story is to work with the Clear Center. And so the Clear Center is based at UC Davis, and their focus is really on research and communications to help animal agriculture operate more efficiently relative to meeting the demands of a growing population while lessening the impact of production on the environment and the climate. And so we work with them in particular to support their communications efforts as they try to convert research into elements and stories that the broader population can understand, especially around a lot of the current issues as they come up for discussion. And then the other way that we leverage work in the consumer space is working with a group called the Protein Pact. And the Protein Pact is about uniting animal agriculture partners to strengthen animal protein's contribution to human health, healthy animals, and a healthy environment. So again, consumer messaging and storytelling around sustainability is a big aspect and an important aspect for us, but not something that we can all do individually. Working collectively, and that gives us more power. All of the efforts that we're doing really center around, for IFEEDER and the feed industry, our sustainability roadmap effort. And the sustainability roadmap for us is about understanding what the needs of our industry are in the sustainability space, understanding what the needs of our stakeholders, mostly our downstream stakeholders, are in the sustainability space, and then starting to prioritize the data and the tools that need to be developed or pursued. When you look at the feed industry, like so many other industries, if you're a company, if you're a corporate entity and you're a multinational publicly traded entity, you probably have a sustainability team within your organization. You've had to do this because of the financial reporting requirements or because of direction that your board is pursuing, and for a variety of other reasons. If you are not in the publicly traded space, or you are just not a large entity, you may not have a full sustainability team. You may not have sustainability on your radar yet. And we have a lot of entities in the feed industry that are that way. So one of the things that IFEEDER is doing is trying to collectively understand what the needs are of our downstream folks so that we can start to build tools and resources and get more of the industry kind of on their sustainability journey. And so that's kind of the direction we're taking. Now, why is it taken so long to get here? You know, are we behind the 8 ball? I actually don't think we are, as I've learned in the last year working in this space, but there are reasons that it's hard to do this. And if you'd go to the next slide, I would offer 2 of them up. In the sustainability space, Dr. Kim Stackhouse-Lawson did an interview or did a webinar with me about 6 months ago. And I really took to heart one of the things that she said, which is that sustainability is so challenging because it's driven by emotion and science. we in the animal agriculture or in the food supply chain space, from the production side of agriculture, we tend to focus on the science. We heard Jack present a lot of the science that for us makes it a no-brainer that the things that we're doing in the sustainability space are correct. But when we then start to bring in the consumer to this element, they're driven more by emotion. And we don't always have their ear in the stories that we want to tell. And so that sustainability in itself makes us have to look and think from different perspectives as we engage in the space. The other thing I think that makes sustainability so hard is that it means optimizing trade-offs. And there are a lot of trade-offs to consider in the sustainability space. I'm going to present a couple of slides that came from a project that IFEEDER just wrapped up and in fact launched about a week and a half ago. And I'm not putting these slides up to open up the can of worms that is the non-GM, GM debate. And I don't want us to have that as our focal point for discussion here. Instead, I'm offering these slides up because I want you to think of them relative to the 2 points I just made, which is that sustainability is about emotion and science, and there are trade-offs that we have to consider. So if you're interested in the data from this report, the full report is available at ifeeder.org. And we worked with Iowa State University and Decision Innovation Solutions to look at the impact of non-GM livestock and poultry feed on the US feed industry. And particularly as a few years ago, we started seeing the shelf space or the market share for non-GM meat, milk, and eggs grow a little bit. And as that occurs, what are the implications for the feed industry? Because obviously the animals that are being used to produce those non-GM products have to be eating non-GM feed as a part of that element. And so the feed industry needed to understand what the implications were, and that's why we undertook the study. One of the points, if you'll go to the next slide, that I think is really stood out to me. One of the findings that they had was if you're just looking at non-GM corn production from the production side, so on the farm, the researchers looked at University of Nebraska crop production budgets from 2020. We all know that GM allows us to reduce some of our operations. It allows us to reduce the passes we have across the field. It makes using no-till easier. And so we end up limiting our fuel use when we use genetically modified traits. So just looking at the fuel use savings and just looking at the GHG or the CO2 emissions that come with combustion of fuel, the study found that if we increase non-GM corn production by 5%, that equates to a 7% annual increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And to me, the most stunning fact is when you do that conversion, use any one of the calculators that are available, EPA has a good one, that's the equivalent of putting 42,000 cars back on the road each year, just for a 5% increase in non-GM corn. So think of that relative to the implications it has for trade-offs. If you'll go to the next slide. We also looked at if you're a feed mill or you're a grain elevator and you have to start handling GM versus non-GM product, which has some segregation requirements, and then puts in a lot of additional operational and capital investments to be able to handle those two separate lines. Or if you can even, if it's feasible to handle those, or if it's not feasible to do that, then the potential of just having a new plant that's solely dedicated just to having non-GM, that really has the potential to increase the feed cost. So it increased the feed cost for pork, poultry, and eggs by about $4 to $9 per ton of feed. But then you can see the translation of that over to increased protein cost to the consumer. Now, it's not quite as significant of an increase for dairy or beef, purely because the ruminant animals don't get as much of their diet from corn and soy. But there's significant cost. So again, thinking about the trade-offs that I just talked about in the sustainability space, as well as the emotion versus science of this story. So from a farm perspective, non-GM has disadvantages for yield, and until non-GM can achieve those same advantages, the likelihood of a farmer switching back to non-GM is pretty low unless there's a significant premium. And then they have to have a place that they can deliver it to. At the feed mill, significant operating cost for them. There may be a premium that they can get for selling non-GM feed, but do they have the capability to implement those operations? And then do they also have the ability to get the product, the grain they need to be able to have those operations? From a consumer standpoint, what could be more important to them? Is it more important to them that they have cheaper protein, or is it more important to them that they have non-GM? Is it more important to them that they have non-GM for their own health considerations? If there's no information that indicates non-GM is unsafe or unhealthy, but there are clearly consumers who are emotionally driven on that element. And then for them, they have to ask, they don't know to ask, but do you care more about the environment, or do you care more about your belief in non-GM? Because that's another trade-off to consider that they may not be aware of. And then I think more interestingly, one of the things we're targeting with the results of our findings here, again, all about a trade-off. If you're a food producer, if you're a company who's interested in putting more non-GM dairy or more non-GM eggs onto the shelf or market space, what are those implications? Because likely you are also making some science-based targets set around climate. And so do you understand from a company standpoint the trade-off between setting that target, achieving that goal, yet at the same time expanding your non-GM egg space on the shelf, for example? And so again, that's where we get into trade-offs that have to be considered for this space. And I think I will leave it there. Again, that full report, if you want to know more, is available at ifeeder.org. And I look forward to the discussion as we go through this session.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was wonderful. And we do have some questions rolling in the chat. So I would encourage everyone to continue to do so, because we want to have a full and robust discussion at the end. So keep them coming. I really appreciate that. And we, unfortunately for us and for you as viewers, we were going to have Tara Vanderdusen, the New Mexico milkmaid, talk next about some of her work with social interaction around sustainability and around dairy, but she is trying to get home from traveling on the road all week with flight delays and was unable to join us. But luckily, we have our very own expert in my co-chair for the council in Fabian to be able to take up this opening in the agenda, and I will graciously hand it off to Fabian. It's all yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And we're going to miss tremendously Tara today. She's a wealth of knowledge when it comes to engaging, especially on social media and be an influencer there. But today, I would like to try to make a best argument on how to have some of these discussions when we are in presence of communities or people or our consumers around the concepts of sustainability. Let's go to the next slide. So the first question is, what is sustainability and how do we define sustainability? I tend to be quite simple in this, and I tend to agree with the United Nations. As sustainability means to meet the needs of present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And there are other definitions that are out there. But what is your definition when you are trying to address these type of questions? When you're trying to talk to your family members and coworkers, and in my case, I'm traveling the world these days, and in many occasions in airports and even in shows, I get a lot of questions on terms of sustainability, especially on the dairy side. Let's go to the next one. So we're going to try to go very quickly through my slides, and it's important to understand where milk sits. And milk is one of the most produced and valuable agriculture commodities around the world. It represents or contributes to 27% of the global value added from livestock. It contributes to 10% of the global value added from agriculture. And indeed, milk and milk products account for about 14% of the global agricultural trade around the world. So this means it is one of the top agriculture commodities around the world, and we have to start talking about it from the point of view of nutrition value and nutrient density when we're discussing dairy and when we're discussing protein, animal protein in general, but nutrient density is very important in this case. Let's go to the next one. So when we're having these discussions, and at least for dairy, the question is no longer, and I would believe that for all animal agriculture, but in this case for dairy, the question is no longer why the sustainability agenda holds a strategic relevance or what actions must be taken in order to achieve it, but rather how are we going to do this? From 2007 to 2017, US has decreased the amount of water used, the amount of land use, and even reduced the carbon footprint. As we saw, Dr. Britt had tremendous information in this, but is this enough? Is this enough for a message? Is this enough for us to address our consumers? Is this enough of a story to tell? Will we engage people just discussing water, land, and carbon? I don't know. I have questions about that, and I often go back to the drawing board and how do we engage those at the other side of the value chain. So next slide. So in that case, we have to start looking at some of the data available out there, and this information is from 2019 and 18. And 70% of consumers would like to see companies' sustainable practices to be more visible to the public. 81% of the global consumers say that it is very or extremely important for companies to implement programs to help the environment. 88% of the consumers would like brands to help them be more environmentally friendly and ethical in their daily lives. And 85% of consumers expect companies to invest in sustainability in the next years. So this is quite important. I mean, these numbers are really telling us that as far as businesses go and entities, we have to start thinking on how do we address this growing interest around sustainability, around their choices, and of course, consumers have tremendous power, that power of choice and what they are going to consume. So these numbers are important when we're thinking about addressing consumers. Let's go to the next one. So we need to tell our story. We need to be loud. I think farmers need a voice. And I'm starting to see this more and more happening, especially in a couple of environments. The virtual environment is happening often, and the social media environment. I'm starting to see more and more of this happening. And the good thing is that people actually trust farmers and trust the way we do. They may have questions about how things are done and how production happens. And like I have questions about somebody building a bridge. I don't have a clue how to build a bridge, but I have questions as, is the bridge safe for me to drive over, right? And is it done with the right equipment? And is it gonna be steady? And is it gonna take the test of time? Well, the consumers have questions about our practices and the things that we do. Let's go to the next one. So it is important to know that there are incredible channels. One of those challenges is the power of social media that gives us the opportunity. And this is a quote direct from Tara, and we miss Tara tremendously today. She's a master at reaching out, talking directly to the people, asking those or answering those difficult questions. But social media has given us the opportunity to reach hundreds, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands and millions of people on a free app in a phone. And the opportunity is right there. The problem is, what's the message? Do we have a complete message? Do we understand what are the pieces and parts that are important in the conversation around sustainability. So let's go to the next one. So when we talk about sustainability, it is important to address sustainability from 3 points of view. Most of the time, we tend to address sustainability from the environmental point of view, with addressing water, air, soil, energy, and ultimately trying to figure it out, the question about GSG or emissions in general. But it is very important to also address society and the communities in which we're working with, and economy, and in there, the efficiency of allocation of scarce resources, but also profit generation and financial returns. So when we're talking about sustainability, this is what we have heard in general being discussed as the triple bottom line, which lead us to the next concept. Let's go to the next slide. And this is the concept of ESG. And why did I bring this concept of ESG? Because we are going to be listening more and more about this. And companies are having to address and report in terms of ESG. And what is ESG? Well, simply is the environmental part of sustainability, the social part of sustainability, and the governance. When I look at animal agriculture, we have to look at climate change, resource depletion, waste, GHG emission, especially methane, energy, animal welfare and farm practices. When it comes to social, we're looking at value and supply chain, diversity and inclusion, labor, farm safety, food safety and education. When we're looking at governance, we're looking at dairy policy and pricing, or in general policies and pricing, revenues by sector, board of membership, general participation, communications, investments, infrastructure, and ultimately profit margins. So at this point is where all these things start to interconnect. And when we are addressing sustainability, and I'm discussing this in public, I try to start by addressing the social impact as well as the environmental impact, and ultimately address the part that deals more with the governance of the conversation. Next. But we have tremendous challenges coming our way, from the anti-animal and plant-based movements, all the way to dairy processors and retailers prioritizing sustainability in their supply chains. And you'll recognize some of these logos giving us a direction of what is important for these brands and what is important ultimately to their customers. Along with these, we have countries making commitments to carbon neutrality and others to net zero carbon. And what that means, what does it mean to us? If we're trying to export to Europe, if we're trying to do businesses with these countries, and what happens to those countries and the businesses and agriculture in there. Actually, in the US, we have an agreement that by 2050, dairy will be net zero. And how are we going to do that? Well, there is some plans to get there. And how do we address consumers when we already have those type of goals in the pipeline? Let's go to the next one. So when we're looking at, I'm going to go very quick through this one. When we're looking about global emissions and emissions, we really have to start looking at the story from multiple places. But when we look at livestock and manure or agricultural sector, we're looking at somewhere about 6 to 10%, depending on your measurements. But if we were to look at agricultural, forestry, and land use together, 18% of the total emissions. So we need to really start looking at how do we address those questions? How do we address the question around our activities? And yet we have taken in the animal agriculture responsibility for this portion, and we're making it happen. As we can see, and I showed before, we're doing tremendously well since 2007 up to this point. But it is important to take responsibility and be able to talk clearly about what we are doing in terms of reducing these numbers. Let's go to the next one. This one, I'm just simply going closer home, and I'm bringing information. I went to this meeting with American Farm Bureau Federation, and they have this excellent slide in which we really are looking at what pieces do we need to address when it comes to agriculture. And it's very important to look at agriculture, soil management, enteric fermentation, manure management, and all these other pieces. And I do believe we have a message and we can build it. The problem is how to address the rest of the sustainability story. Let's go to the next one. Well, along with these problems, there is a bigger problem, and Dr. Britt alluded to this. And I don't know why 2050 has become the year, I don't know, but 2050 the population should be close to 9.4 billion people, requiring a lot more food. So how are we going to feed all these people? I do believe that animal agriculture is in the right place to do this and to deliver nutrient-dense foods so we can address a hungry population. So it is very important that through technology, innovation, and approaching to those markets with the right products, with the right messaging, we will be able to do so. Let's go to the next one. So here we need to start doing a connection and making connections between the farm goals, which may deal with animals, feeding, housing, manure management, application, soil, nutrients, many other pieces, while the industry might be looking and here what I'm showing is the materiality assessment on dairy. And we're looking at within these topics, product safety, healthy nutrition, animal care, GHG emissions, soil, energy, workforce, and biodiversity become pieces and parts that are important for our consumers. So how do we address both sides of this equation? And how do we talk clearly about what are our goals, what is it that we're doing in terms of taking responsibility for our part in this whole picture of sustainability, and how do we address those concerns by our consumers? And I do believe as we clarify the language around sustainability, we will be able to do that. As we are clarifying the goals and farmers finally get a whole concept of what are the goals that they have to achieve, how do we get there, and what language should we use when addressing our consumers, I think we'll have a better way to address these at large, and especially there, right there at the consumer level. Next. And with that, thank you very much. I'll leave it to the group for discussion right now.
Okay, great job, Fabian. Thank you so much. And that brings us around to starting to answer some of the questions that have come up throughout the session. And I'm going to basically start with one of the first questions that came in, and that was from John White. He is with the United Producers, Inc., and I believe he lives near Findlay, Ohio. So John asked the question, if operational efficiency equals sustainability, and this is for you, Jack, so be ready. If efficiency equals sustainability, why is U.S. ag under attack for not being sustainable enough? So Jack, you want to start off with that? And you're still muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Okay, thanks. I think it's pretty clear why the consumers and people are confused, because we talk about the greenhouse gas production per cow or per hectare or acre or per farm. We don't talk about the greenhouse gas production or the sustainability of the quart of milk that we buy at the grocery store. We're measuring, we're taking a very highly productive animal and a very highly productive farm and saying those levels are too high. But what we're producing is food. And if we look at the food component, the levels are very low. And so we have big farms in the United States. We have big herds of cows in the United States. They produce more milk than anyone else. So as the production unit, we produce a lot of greenhouse gases and maybe pollutants and other things. But when you take it down to a kilogram of milk or a liter of milk, we're the lowest in the world. So part of the problem is we're measuring the wrong thing. You know, if you compare a bulldozer with a motor scooter, you say we would all be doing our work with motor scooters. We shouldn't be using bulldozers to build that new bridge, right, Fabian? I mean, that's the kind of analogy that we have here, is we're actually looking and measuring the wrong unit. The unit is that we produce is a liter of milk or a pound of cheese. It's not a cow or a farm.
And somebody commented that you had put little bits of information out there, especially on LinkedIn, that are very useful. So with that in mind, if I'm going to challenge you and ask you to do something for us.
Sure.
If you would take and just define by species how we should be talking about the measurement of sustainability, and kind of put that out there as a tidbit on your next LinkedIn post.
I'll do that. Yeah.
I'll always come up with good things to try to get you to do.
If we took a used car lot and looked at its environmental impact, and a large dealership of new cars and looked at its environmental impact, they would be greatly different. So what we have to do is look at the car level, not at the business level. But consumers don't understand. Maybe they just haven't thought about that.
Very true. And that's part of building the story and being able to tell our story. So that's a great point. So I'll give this next question to Laura. And this is from Fabian, so you can blame Fabian if you don't like the question. But how is legislation influencing your development and strategic process? And how is this applicable then at the farm level?
Well, it actually touches in different ways for the feed industry. Maybe not a legislative element, but a regulatory element for certain. So when you look at the desired goal to reduce enteric fermentation from ruminant animals, and you consider the opportunities that we have for feed strategies and feed additives and interventions, again, the possible technologies. Right now, we don't have a great way to move some of those product classes through FDA. It just doesn't exist. And so we have challenges from a regulatory process with the ability to implement some of the technologies that we have available to us. So that I put in the, if you're in DC, you tend to group things into the legislative and the regulatory arena collectively together and call them policy. So I think that's for certain one area. But, additionally, there's a interesting new development right now that everybody's taking a look at, which is the SEC proposal to require reporting of greenhouse gas emissions and other elements. And you might say, well, okay, that is going to be a requirement for SEC mandated companies. That would be a requirement for those that are publicly traded already. However, if you understand what it means to report greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1 are the emissions within your facility, scope 2 are the emissions that come from the energy that you use, and scope 3 are the emissions that come from all of your supply chain. Well, guess what? If that publicly traded company has to report, then they're going to have that information to report those scope 3 emissions. If you're a company who is a provider of scope 3 or supply chain to that downstream company, you're going to fall under regulatory requirements, because if you submit data that is inaccurate, you can be held legally liable for that potentially. And so, there are things underway that we are paying attention to relative to how they may impact what's going on in the sustainability space. So I think that right now, the SEC one is probably the biggest consideration right now. Of course, everybody's also looking at the USDA, again, not quite a legislative or regulatory, but I'm going to put it in the policy space because it's coming out of DC. The the Climate Smart Ag Commodities Program, right? Many of you may be involved in proposals that are getting pulled together. You know, that's a lot of funding that's going to be coming into the climate space in particular that will have implications in the sustainability space for animal agriculture. And so that'll be interesting to watch that evolve. And for certain feed, like we're just like the rest of you, we're working with a team to put a proposal in. And so I think those types of things will influence what we do in the space.
Great response and good input. I'll move this to where all three of you can respond to this question. And this comes from Baron Coops, who's a colleague of mine at Merck. So I give him a call out, but telling the story and sharing the message on how our producers are being sustainable is part of what we need to be telling the public. So how can we, as an industry, do a better job of sharing the things that we're doing?
I have an example. I just came across this example like on Saturday, this last week. So a friend of mine, well-educated, college degree, asked me how my week went. And I said, I've been doing a ton of interviews because of this report that we released, the one that I gave some insight into. And she said, what was the report on? And I said, well, we were looking at the use of the potential growth for non-GM feed. And she said, that's really great. I happen to know this individual prefers, has a preference for non-GM in her diet. And so I said, you know, as you look at this space, I said, have you ever given consideration to, your desire for non-GM relative to the environment and not just what your perceptions are for your own health? And she said, no, is there a difference? And I explained to her some of the findings that we had. And she said, well, I really do believe it's right to have, to eat that non-GMO bread. I think it's better for us. And I said, there is no GM wheat, so that's not even really a thing. And what that, just like what that reminded me of is, here's a college educated friend of mine who I've never had that conversation with. And I think all of us that work in agriculture owe it to ourselves to help communicate. Can we change everybody's mind? No. But can we help inform vast pieces of the population for all of us that work in this space? Yes. We do, as I mentioned, IFEEDER does engage with other entities where we can leverage and we can unify and we can bring folks together for that messaging. That's important as well. But I would also say that each of us has our own story that we need to tell, and we have peers that we can influence.
That's an excellent example. I'm going to let Fabian chime in on it now.
Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, as language is becoming much more clear and science is much more accurate in this, the message and the story can be built from that point of view. But I can agree with you more, Laura. It is a matter of having these clear definitions and understanding and be able to reach out with the complete package. It can be one versus the other, as Dr. Britt mentioned. It has to be something together. It has to be a picture that addresses the needs, the science, but also that social part and the economics around this whole thing. I do believe that at this point, we are doing a better job at this. We're setting goals and setting a target for farmers to be able to follow and understand and be able to make decisions of how to address that. And as farmers are taking responsibility and have taken responsibility for that, we are better equipped now to talk in public as well as in private in some of these scenarios, as you mentioned, Laura, with your friend. I had multiple situations of that. I have invited friends to come to my farm, and while we're eating lamb, they are seeing live animals, my live animals out the window, and they are asking me, how do you feel about eating the animal that is right there? Well, I have done the job. I have done everything possible to bring the best quality food to your table, and you see it right there. And the conversation gets open, and those are private conversations. Now the public conversations, you might need a little more tools and information and bring the communication from different points of view. But yes, we are not going to change everybody's mind. The small amount that are very loud are taking a great piece of the conversation. And that's why I want to bring the conversation back to the farmers. I want to bring the conversation to be similar across all animal protein groups, and be able to formalize a way to address sustainability and address these concerns by our customers, but all across. And that's really what I would like with Angela to accomplish with this council, be able to formalize that language, formalize pieces and parts of the story, so we can deliver that the best possible.
Okay, Jack, what do you have to tell us about communicating your message?
One of the things that I have had the opportunity to do is serve on boards of other organizations, statewide boards or national boards. And so I like to give a talk to the board members about agriculture and food, because mostly those are influential people from across the state or across the nation. And so if they're leading a large organization and they hear this good story, they might go home and talk to others, tell others about this. And I get invited often to speak to just public groups in the community or the next county or even the next state. And so I take advantage, and I talk to those folks like I would talk to my mom. You know, it's not a scientific, I use different words than I do when I talk to scientists. And so I think if you're in another organization as a board member or even member, and you get the opportunity to talk to that organization about agriculture and what we're doing well, or even what we need to improve, you know, that opens a dialogue. And that's the most important thing, is to have a dialogue.
I would agree, and build that trust so that they will then listen. You know, much like what Laura was saying, it was her friend, you know, so she had a trust level established, and then she can have that discussion. So that's part of not being defensive, especially when it's not your friend, and letting them know that you're willing to listen to what their concerns are. So that's fantastic. And what I would like to do real fast, we're pretty much almost at the end of our time, because I see JJ showing up. So what I'll do is I'll open it up for anyone in the audience. If you would like to ask a live question, I will open that up. So if you would raise your hand or unmute and introduce yourself, I'll give you that opportunity. Very bashful people. If not, I will close our session. But before we do, I'm sure JJ would not be very happy with me if I didn't talk about the fact that the NIAA's conference is next week. And I want to make sure that you all know that it is here in Kansas City, and that it will be from Wednesday through Friday of next week. But even more important, the Sustainability Council is on Friday, and Fabian and I would both like everyone that has an interest, that wants to have input on how the council is developed and fleshed out here in the next few months to the next few years. We would like to have you participate in that council meeting on Friday. So thank you to all of the speakers today, Laura, Jack, Fabian. And is there anything else that we need to discuss, Fabian, that you have, or JJ that you want us to add?
I couldn't done it better. Angela, thank you so much. And to all the speakers, phenomenal, incredible launch of our council, and fantastic webinar. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you for having us.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Angela and Fabian, for being our initial co-chairs of this council. And on behalf of, we have several board members. I've seen Dr. Eric Moore, and of course, our board chairman, Kevin Meyer, Dr. Karen Jordan, and Dr. Lucas Pantaleone on as well. So thank you all for your leadership. And as Angela said, we hope to see many of you either online or even better in person here next week in Kansas City. So thank you, everyone. And there's a survey link there on your screen, or you will be receiving it via email. And we will see you next time. Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Fabian. Thank you, Jack and Lara and everybody. Have a great afternoon.